Phone lines have been damaged. For the first time, civilian infrastructure has been seriously affected. Iraqi officials said 7 civilians were killed in the city. The explosions were some of the loudest and most violent since the start of hostilities. It's believed a 5,000-pound bunker-busting bomb may have been used to hit an underground target. Iraqi TV was taken off air for a time. In Basra, which in recent days has seen a trickle of its inhabitants leaving, is now, according to British military sources, witnessing a stream of between 1,000 and 2,000. But the Iraqi authorities, it appears, were not prepared to allow them to escape.
Paramilitary forces loyal to the regime followed them and commenced firing upon them. The Black Watch, who were there, have then attempted to intercept the paramilitaries by going round the civilians and placing themselves between them and the civilians.
The counter-offensive in the war of words came from the Iraqi information minister, alleging that coalition troops had attacked civilians in Najaf before pulling back.
The hostile American-British troops have targeted. They wanted to hit civilian areas at the outskirts of Najaf, or the areas of Najaf. Only yesterday, since before yesterday until yesterday evening, because they were defeated.
In central Iraq, American Marines were making most of delays caused by the weather and the long supply chain. Sleep and maintenance will prepare them for the battle for Baghdad, which lies ahead. But the US Defense Secretary is talking about a further wait and talking up the possibility of an uprising in Baghdad among the Shiite population. But Washington can't rely on insurrection. More troops headed out for the Gulf last night. Another 120,000 are destined to join them. But they won't be fighting in Iraq for another 2 to 3 weeks. There's been criticism about whether the numbers of personnel so far deployed have been adequate. The American administration insists the increases were planned. Jane Bennett-Powell, BBC News.
Nick, not here because we're a long, long way south of Kuwait City, and I think probably beyond the range of any Iraqi missiles here. But this, as you say, is the main bombing base that the coalition are using. There's been a lot of talk about precision weapons. I think we could just show you this bunker here, which was obviously a hangar for aircraft before, and that was from the last Gulf War when the Iraqis were occupying here, and that is one bunker that was hit absolutely directly. The main aircraft flying from here, the A-10s, the F-16s, F-18s, and a large number of British Harriers. You can probably see a whole group of them behind me now. Let's move round now to meet one of the pilots who's been busy flying the Harriers over the past week or so, Wing Commander Chris Norton. What is it like when you get the order to fly and you're suddenly over Iraq and you have to release those weapons?
Well, the only time we actually release the weapons is when we have to. Our primary role here is support of our forces on the ground. So we're flying over them, and we only release the weapons on people who are trying to kill our forces.
And so how often have you had to press the release button since you've been flying this in the past week or so? 3 or 4 times for me personally. What is that like for the pilots? Because I should imagine for some of the younger ones that is the first time they've ever fired a missile or dropped a bomb in anger. It is, and the first time that it happens is definitely a watershed. But I think everybody is apprehensive. You know, it is a huge thing to do. These aeroplanes have a phenomenal amount of firepower, but our job is to use it discriminately, and that's what we're doing. What about the stuff coming up from the ground, the anti-aircraft fire or missiles? Have you been surprised by just how much has been thrown up at you? We've perhaps been lucky in that our area of operations has been, as I say, over our own troops, which means that the main weight of Saddam's surface-to-air missile system arsenal is not necessarily where we are, because we have the ground underneath. So perhaps it's not been as bad as it could be. It's not as bad as it is, for instance, around Baghdad, but it's very, very real. And when you're shot at, it certainly concentrates the mind. So what is it? What is the feeling? How do you first realise that you are being shot at? Well, it depends whether it's the day or the night. At night, you can see everything. You will have seen your news pictures that every bullet, every missile is a streak of light across the sky.
In the daytime, then you can't see them as easily. It's smoke, and you can't see the bullets, obviously. But you know he's shooting at you. He's always shooting at you. That anyone would, and so that is a very real threat.
So far, apart from the incident where the Tornado was shot down by a Patriot, there have been no, I don't think, any fixed-wing aircraft lost. Is that because you're flying at such an altitude where realistically there is no danger for you?
No, it's not. We practice against the threat all the time. That's our job, and our manoeuvres are good. The heights that we fly negate some of the threat, but we need to be able to get low enough to recognise the targets that we're going for. So we go where we need to go, and the threat is very real.
Just a final question. Do you think that perhaps the Iraqis, and I know you've flown in northern Iraq in the no-fly zone, do you think they have been underestimated by some people as an enemy?
No, I don't think they've been underestimated at all. Personally, I have a lot of respect for the soldiers and the defence systems. If I didn't, I would probably get shot down, and we all have a lot of respect for them. If you want to ask about how quickly the war happens, then we're trying to do this very even-handedly. We're using precision weapons against specific targets that are pinning down our own forces, and therefore we march forward as slowly as that takes. It is inevitable that we will win, and it's just a question of how long.
Okay. Wing Commander Chris Norton, thanks very much indeed. This is the scene here at this massive airbase. You can probably hear the roar of planes taking off and taxiing behind me. One person described it as like a supermarket car park on a Saturday afternoon. There are so many planes manoeuvring about. But now, Nick, back to you.
Towns and villages using translators and using the PSYOPs people, which have very large loudspeakers on their vehicles, and trying to communicate with the people that live there, to the citizenry, and say, look, if you're harboring these Fedayeen, if they are in your neighborhood, if you are putting them up, then you're jeopardizing yourselves in the village itself, because you then may become targets as we go after the Fedayeen, and you don't want that, and we don't want that. So they try the hearts and mind technique. And then at the same time, though, when they do come under attack, they respond with very heavy force, trying to make a clear example here that you don't go trying to attack U.S. military convoys here, and if you do, you're going to pay a substantial price. So you have sort of the good cop and the bad cop approach on dealing with this, but now it's moving to a further stage, and that is try to find out where these groups are operating out of, what is their home base, so to speak, and then the Marines will try to stamp them out.
This is the largest group of infantry to be flown to Iraq or to join the 101st Brigade deep inside the war zone.
To get alongside are absolutely clear. You'll remember that we've had dolphins, US Navy dolphins in looking for mines. They were back in the water this morning. We've had human divers in searching the whole of the pier area and the stanchions to make sure that there's nothing clamped to any of them. There are no booby traps, but they've not been able to clear the whole of the waterway. They simply haven't had time, and of course the priority is to get this aid into the country. So there's a fairly narrow channel that they have to navigate through to be sure that they won't come into any problems.
David, how is the aid going to be distributed once the Sagala had arrived? Because we've seen some pretty chaotic scenes when there have been attempts to distribute aid elsewhere in Iraq.
It's not entirely clear, but as I understand it, what they're going to do is offload the ship, a huge ship with some 230 metric tons of aid on board, and they're going to keep that aid in the port. It will be stored here in the port of Qasr, and what they're going to try and do is get local community leaders to come here and get them to distribute the aid. Now, of course, the problem with that is that it's a recipe for a quick black market to set up. So what the US and British forces are going to do is, whilst they're not actually going to distribute the aid themselves, they are going to monitor where it goes, who gets it, and make sure that nobody uses it to make a fast buck. But I think that's the theory now, that it'll be easier for the people who know where it's needed most to distribute it, rather than blanket distribution by the troops.
Commanders report that this morning, paramilitaries they've been referring to for days as thugs fired mortars at up to 2,000 hungry civilians trying to escape from the city. One woman was seriously injured. The Iraqi militia were shielded from British gunfire by the fleeing refugees.
Here we see perhaps the initial signs of the Ba'ath Party control the irregulars losing an element of control of their civilian population, who clearly they wish to keep inside the town for their own purposes.
Arab media sources, though, inside Basra say refugees have told them they aren't being fired on and that it's only US and British checkpoints that are slowing their progress out of the city. At dawn, a few minutes before these pictures were taken, these Challenger tanks attacked what they identified as the latest convoy of paramilitaries trying to leave Basra and head for British positions. They destroyed some of the vehicles and killed many of the Iraqi soldiers who were dressed as civilians.
It's still very hard when you do see bodies on the street afterwards wearing civilian clothes. Even though they have held up weapons against you, a body in civilian clothes still looks like a body in civilian clothes. So it is something hard to deal with.
Further south, regular Iraqi soldiers have been surrendering to British troops from 40 Commando on the Al-Faw Peninsula. Specially trained dolphins are still checking the port of Mkaza for mines. The discovery of 2 earlier this week postponed the arrival of the Royal Fleet Auxiliary Sir Galahad and its much-needed cargo of aid. The British ship has just reached the port. Its 300 tons of food and bottled water are supposed to go to the people of Basra. How long that will take is anyone's guess.
The north, but so far we've seen no huge exodus coming south from Basra or Azerbaijan, perhaps because of the militias. All the time, Coalition Radio 2 Rivers on 100.4 FM is transmitting into the city with unlikely music. I can't say what the Basrans make of being bombarded by the Bee Gees, but they certainly get the propaganda message too. We are not against you, the Iraqi people. We are against Saddam Hussein and his supporters. Elsewhere, the message is less sophisticated. The old-fashioned business of artillery, this at the north of the Rumaila oil field during the recent storms. But be it the military or propaganda message, neither Iraq's army nor her people are yet succumbing to it en masse.
Indeed. Well, as you can see, the planes keep coming in, keep going out. I mean, it's absolutely non-stop here since we've been here. It's just an incredible pace at which these planes are taking off and coming into land. This is also the base of the British Harriers, and there are a large contingent of them here. And I'm joined now by Warrant Officer Wally Merton and Group Captain John Fiennes. Wally Merton, I mean, as Warrant Officer, that's kind of in Army speak, it's Regimental Sergeant Major.
That's correct, yes.
So you're in charge of discipline and keeping everyone in check?
That's the general idea, and I'll try my best to do that.
And how's it going?
It's going really well. We've got a great team of people here, and they're doing a fantastic job.
I'm sure a lot of people at home would be fascinated about how just the existing here works in terms of sleep patterns, in terms of, you know, presumably you're sleeping on the base and it's blooming noisy.
Yes, we are, yeah. The majority of people on the deployment are doing 12-hour shifts, which we've been doing since we arrived. So it's 12 hours on, 12 hours off, 7 days a week.
Day and night?
Yes.
And do you have trouble getting to sleep at night when you're...
It can be. I tend to sleep with earplugs in, a lot of guys, but it is difficult. And the guys sleeping during the day have problems because of the heat as well. So
this is probably a really stupid question, but do you have air conditioning?
Not at the moment, no. The pilots got air conditioning. They need obviously more rest than we do. There is a requirement in, and we're due to get some air conditioning in the near future.
And do you get problems with many of the people getting homesick because you've been out here for quite a time now?
I think, yes, we do. I mean, some of the younger lads and lasses get a bit homesick at times, but I just be the father figure and try and look after them all.
It must be a very odd job mixing those two roles of sort of both discipline and, you know, and kind of at times having to be the caring uncle.
It's just part of the job, really. I've done this for 32 years now, so I've grown into it a little bit, really.
Okay. All right, Group Captain John Fiennes. Different question to you. You've become a familiar figure to us, explaining what's been happening. And every time I've spoken to you, you've said to me everything's going to plan. And now we're starting to get noises from Washington that actually this is all turning into something a bit more tough, and that this hadn't been war gamed, as they say, in advance.
What they're actually saying is that elements...
We'll just let that plane go.
the higher the level you war game at, the more you actually consider. So right at the top, just about everything has been war gamed and considered. Down at the lower levels, the regiments, the battalions, it's quite possible that they themselves would be considering some of what's been going on.
OK, there's another plane taking off. Actually, once this plane goes, it's pretty much all clear. Go on, try again. Sorry, you were just saying at the end there.
Yes, I mean, down at the battalion, the regimental level, where they've been focusing on fighting formed units, the pure military, then they probably themselves wouldn't have been wargaming, as you would call it, against these unformed units, the militia. But at the higher levels, we're not totally surprised. There's more of them, perhaps, than we expected. But it's been considered.
You're preparing to be here for a few more weeks, I suspect.
Well, my original posting notice said a lot longer than we've been here so far, and nothing's changed on that. We all came out with a long posting.
OK, John Fines, Wally Merton, thanks very much indeed. You can see and probably tell the noise of living here day in, day out. It is extraordinary. The whole ground shakes when some of these planes go past. But now, back to you in London.
And this is the Galahad behind me. It's docked within the last few minutes after a delay of several days, really. First because of fighting in Qasr itself, which has now died down considerably. The Royal Marines are in control here. And then latterly because of mines in the waterway up which Sir Galahad has just moved and docked at this port. Now, any moment now, a convoy of lorries will draw up to Sir Galahad and will begin unloading these tons and tons of aid that's so desperately needed. Now, in the initial phase, the forces here say this aid operation will consist of such stuff as water, food and blankets. Then there is a planned second stage of aid, which will cover such things as water pipelines, sewage projects, power supplies, medical support. That very much, though, more longer term. The immediate necessity is to get the aid off this ship and distribute it. The problem is that it's very dangerous indeed out there, out of Qasr, and very dangerous indeed, clearly, around the city of Basra. So getting it off the ship will be easy. Getting into lorries is easy. Getting it to the people, not so easy.
OK. Mark Austin, I'm sure we'll be talking to you later. Thank you very much indeed. Well, let's move to Baghdad now, where there were those renewed attacks that you saw overnight. Neil Connery joins me now from there. Neil, the sandstorm's gone, the skies are clear, and as we predicted, the bombs started again, didn't they?
Yes, Katie, another noisy night here in Baghdad. What was interesting last night was some of the weaponry that was involved. Just before 4 o'clock in the morning, we heard an enormous explosion. It's completely dwarfed anything I've heard here in the past 7 days. And I understand from US sources it was a 5,000-pound bunker-busting bomb that was dropped. Its force was so great, it shook the hotel that we were in. We were on the 6th floor of that hotel. The floor moved, the windows rattled. It was a very frightening few seconds. Now, some of the targets that were included last night, there were a communications tower here in Baghdad, also the main telephone exchange, which is about half a mile up the road behind me here. I had a look down there this morning. There is a huge crater in the road and large cracks going up the side of the building as well. So those were some of the targets that were involved here last night.
Now, distributing aid so far have been fraught with difficulties. The Kuwaiti Red Crescent has taken some aid in trucks over the border into border towns in the very southern parts of Iraq, and they themselves described those attempts at distributing the aid there as disastrous.
Our correspondent earlier in southern Iraq was saying it's not so much a desperate need for food yet, it's water. And that is particularly necessary, of course, in Basra.
Another eventful night on the front line. US Marines pounded what they believe is a training camp for so-called Fadayin fighters, Iraqi militiamen staunchly loyal to Saddam Hussein.
For the third time tonight, the Marines are pounding Iraqi positions a short distance from here, but the resistance they're encountering has proved remarkably stubborn.
A journey which it's thought would take 24 hours to complete is now more than 4 days behind schedule. A series of attacks by Iraqi fighters has made the Americans nervous. Faced with sniper attacks from a building complex, they took no chances, first deploying an F-14 Tomcat to bomb it.
That's demolition.
Then following up with cannon and mortar attacks. As the convoy moved on, the effects of the previous night's battle were clear to see.
There's no doubt about who won this battle. We've seen the bodies of Iraqi fighters along the roadside. Buildings and vehicles have been reduced to dust.
A single shot through the windscreen shows how the driver of this vehicle died. The Marines say Iraqi soldiers are posing as civilians and shooting at them, although the circumstances surrounding this death are unclear. Suddenly, nobody is above suspicion, even those who surrender. As Marines closed in on this man, forcing him to lie down, it suddenly became clear he was not alone. The greatest challenge now for Allied forces, separating friend from foe. David Willis, BBC News, in central Iraq.
At this afternoon's press briefing, no outward signs of jitters. Once again, reporters shown a familiar array of video material, including this strike on an Iraqi missile site near Karbala, and the sort of before and after images designed to show that one by one, Iraq's military assets are being destroyed.
In the past 24 hours, we continued combat operations against regime forces, conducted strikes against regime command and control, and took major steps forward in setting the foundation for the future Iraq.
But what does Brigadier General Brooks make of the words of the senior American Army commander inside Iraq, who says the war is not going as planned?
I don't think that we have necessarily underestimated, and I am certain that we accounted for enemy action. The specifics of the action, no one can ever predict exactly how battle will unfold. We can't even completely predict how our own actions will unfold. But I think we remain confident that we have a good grip on what's going on here, and we're proceeding.
And so, from CENTCOM at least, a confident demeanour. One by one, oil fires in the south being put out. Painstaking work by joint American-Kuwaiti teams. Talk, too, of broadcasts, including a new British radio station designed to promote the coalition message. But all the while, the nagging suspicion that this is proving very hard. Paul Adams, BBC News, Coalition Headquarters in Qatar.
Ship, the Sir Galahad, making its way to the port of Qasr with vital supplies on board. 300 tons of food and water, desperately needed by the people of southern Iraq. It's the first major shipment of aid here, already delayed by several days. First by fierce fighting in the town, then by Iraqi landmines. Scenes make clear it won't be easy getting the aid to those who need it most. The Kuwaiti Red Crescent brought 45,000 boxes of food and water to the border village of Safwan, with British troops protecting the delivery. But the handout turned to mayhem as the strongest grabbed it first, leaving nothing for the most vulnerable. On the lookout for Iraqi militiamen among the crowds, British soldiers didn't intervene. They're still wary after snipers fired at them during an earlier delivery. Some aid agencies have been critical of these initial efforts. Targeting such aid is difficult at the best of times, and they say the army simply isn't trained to do this job. We're here with the Sir Galahad, which has just docked. It's about to be unloaded, and I'm joined by Brigadier Sean Cowlam, the man who is going to be in charge of getting aid to those people who desperately need it. Brigadier, on the way here, we saw one truck of aid being mobbed by young men trying to get the food and the water there. How can you get it to the people who need it most?
Within each of the brigades and battle groups, we had embedded teams whose specific purpose is to identify those areas of greatest need. Once we know where those areas are and we find out exactly what they need, we're very confident that we can focus our aid to the greatest point of need.
How can you do it, though, when we've seen some of these aid convoys actually coming under sniper fire? British soldiers trying to deliver aid, but the irregular militia actually targeting them as they do so.
Clearly, security is our greatest priority. And it's true to say that we can't deliver aid until the environment is secure, both secure for our forces, but more importantly for the Iraqi people themselves. So it's true to say that it's the Iraqi militia who are preventing us from delivering this urgent need.
And nowhere more so than in the city of Basra, where we've heard they've actually been targeting civilians today. That is one city that is now running out of water. How on earth do you get this aid from this ship to the people of Basra?
We have aid standing by in each of the brigades and battle groups to go into Basra immediately the security situation permits. We also have echelons of support behind the brigades to further reinforce that delivery.
And finally, is there a plan, and when can you hand over to civilian aid agencies, very briefly?
This is a very important point. We're here to fill the gap, to buy time between now as the liberation proceeds and the 30 days or so it's going to take the international organisations to come forward and deliver a replacement for the Oil for Food programme.
Brigadier Sean Cowlam, thank you for joining us here in the port of Qasr. Back to you.
Of U.S. paratroopers that landed there early Thursday in an airborne operation. The initial force of about 1,000 airborne troops secured the airfield that allowed the planes to enter. In addition to troop reinforcements, they're now taking delivery of tanks, armored personnel carriers, and artillery.
What's going on right now, you can see over there a C-130 landing. That is carrying people and cargo in now that this base is beginning to go into operation. It is just one of the planes that has come in since we have been there. We were with a group that, as you said, took forever to get in just for a variety of reasons. We came in this morning past a gate that has a picture of Saddam Hussein on it. They're everywhere, of course. But then instead of finding Iraqis manning this air base, it is now under the control of the United States and the coalition forces. It was taken many days ago. It is now going to be turned into what they call a forward air base. It's somewhere in southeastern Iraq. It is surrounded, by the way, by areas that are called hotspots where there's a lot of combat going on, but this is now considered secure. It is a place where A-10s are going to be the featured attraction. A-10s, of course, the very potent anti-tank airplanes that are going to be landing here. We expect them within the next day or so because part of our convoy was to carry a very volatile jet fuel mix, which, of course, is vital for the A-10s operating from here. It's about 150 miles closer to the action from where they were located down south, about 150 miles from where you are, Jim. Now, here, the day after this base was taken, and last week had a search and rescue mission from here where they were successful. They picked up a number of people. They won't tell us more about it, except that they were, in fact, able to live up to their motto as the 9/11 of the Air Force. One of the things that has happened here as people scour the airport is that we noticed that they are keeping some prisoners of war here. Some prisoners of war, about 100 of them, were in fact sitting on the tarmac till just about the time we showed up. They were hastily loaded onto trucks and taken somewhere nearby. They're going to be eventually relocated down south a little bit at a place called Camp Buka, which is being set up as a POW camp, assuming that the area remains safe. There is some question about that. Others here have been going on a search of the various bunkers and old buildings that are here, and what they're calling an e-base search. And I want to show you one of the fruits of their labors, and that is this. In one of the buildings, there are a whole number of these gas masks. They're not our gas masks for the United States. These are the Iraqi gas masks. These are the